Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Project Management Professional Certification series. Most of us are rushing to take our exam before the 8th edition is coming in place. We all know 7th edition is going to be obsolete in a while. For those of you who are rushing to take your exam, this full overview or recap will stay as a very good reminder. I've been repeating this in all my sessions that I finally decided to record it and make it public so that not only my participants, but also those of you who are planning to take the exam, this may come in handy. Please give me your valuable feedback in the comments section so that we can see what other concepts are confusing and we can take it up in a more simplistic approach. Let's dive deep into a full recap of the way how your PMBOK 7 has been structured. There are totally 6 lessons that has been defined in your version 7 of your PMBOK. These 7 or rather the 6 lessons are going to be taken in a very, very logical sequence. So the first one we are going to talk about is the business environment. And this is going to be the starting. You can, in colloquial terms, maybe you can call it as the pre-project stage. And after that, we are going to start with a project. And we will also be planning the project. After starting, we have to plan for the project. And during a project execution stage, we have to start with lead the team. And we need to also focus on support project team performance. And finally, we are going to close the project. Now, in terms of a realistic project environment, this is again very logically sequenced because we can usually call this as the pre-project stage or the pre-project phase. The reason is even before we start with a project, as in as a project manager is officially included, we need to do a little bit of a preliminary preparation, and that goes under the business environment. When you talk about starting the project, this is what usually in a project environment, we call it as the initiating phase. And then as usual, we need to start with a planning phase. We need to do the executing phase, monitoring and controlling phase, and finally closing phase. And these are the ones which is represented as the different lessons for us. So whatever you will see as part of your lesson 1 is covered here. Whatever we saw as part of your lesson 2 was covered here. Lesson 3 is here. Here comes your lesson 4. Lesson 5, and finally your lesson 6. All right. So when we say we are in the pre-project phase, which is the business environment, we are going to evaluate the foundational information. When you say foundational information, we need to be aware of what is the organizational structure. This is where we spoke about whether it is a matrix organization or a functional organization or a projectized organization. Along with that, we need to know what are the enterprise environmental factors and the organizational process asset, because we need to know what are the political and the social factors we need to be aware of, and the templates and the lessons learned that we need to take on. All those must be evaluated. And one another very important approach that you will need to know is it really a project in the first place, or is it a portfolio or a program or an operational work which is camouflaged with the word project and it is given to us? So we need to be clear about whether it is really a project. So this is where the definition of project, definition of portfolio, definition of program, operations, and all these we saw. Then we need to be aware of who would be the crying shoulders for the project manager in a project environment, which is basically the PMO, or we have the Agile Center of Excellence team if you're working in an Agile kind of an environment. So these are the typical ones that we covered as part of your foundational lesson. Then we moved on to the strategic alignment, where we first need to identify what is the reason for the organization to even take on this initiative in the first place. Is it worth for us to even start with this initiative? Because every project, there is a particular resource allocation that is needed, funding that is needed. So we need to evaluate whether it is even worthwhile to go ahead with this project in the first place. So that is what we are trying to do as an evaluation here. Then we need to start with the project benefits and value. So you're coming up with the business case and all these over here. We need to also be clear with the organizational cultural factors, like how failures are taken, how the organization, even though it is a very hierarchical kind of an organization, how team members are evaluated. All those must come in place. So that is where the organizational culture comes in place. Then we need to also talk about the organizational change management. This is the place where we will be focusing in terms of our ATKAR framework, as well as your project, your vision statement, which is what we called it as the North Star statement. And apart from that, we need to know what level of governance and compliance that we need to align with. So how do you know that you have completed the business environment evaluation, right? So that must be coming in as the next thing. So there must be some kind of an output that we are getting when we say we have completed certain things. So what are the outputs that we are expecting here? This is where we are going to talk about two. One is called as the business case. Another one is called as the benefits measurement plan. So we are going to create these two. And once you have these two, we can comfortably start with a project. So as a project manager, you're going to be assigned at this particular stage. So this is the place where we are going to even evaluate who are our stakeholders that we have to work with. Because when we start with a project, we need to first understand who are we trying to satisfy by this particular project work. So that is where we need to align with something called as identify and engage the stakeholders. And one is we need to understand for whom we are doing this project, or who is that we are trying to satisfy. The next one we have to understand is with the help of whom we are trying to satisfy our stakeholders. So that is where we talk about form the team. Then we need to understand how to build the shared understanding. So this is where the most important document in a project, which is going to be called as the project charter. In other words, you can take this as the birth certificate for a project is going to be created. So we are going to talk about determine the project approach as well, whether we want to go for an agile or a predictive approach or a hybrid approach. These are going to be evaluated at this particular stage, because if you decide you're going to do this project in an agile manner, your planning approach is going to be completely dependent on that. If we say we are going to follow a predictive approach, then the way how you're going to do your planning will be completely different. So in other words, we need to be clear about what is the approach we are going to do. So once we have that clarity, we can straight away start with a planning phase. So which means here, the most important document that we are expecting as an output or an outcome is your project charter and your product vision statement. So you're going to create a project charter, which is basically a very, very important document. And as I said, that is considered to be something like a birth certificate for the project. So once we have started the project, we can comfortably move on with the planning phase. When you say planning, you're going to create a document called as your project management plan. When you say project management plan, you have to first define all the how aspects, which is how to manage your scope, how to manage your schedule, how to manage your cost, how to manage your resources. In other words, as a project manager or a sponsor, whatever information that is going to guide us in managing the project will all come under the subsidiary plans. Once we define the how, the next one we have to define is the what. What is the scope? What is a budget? What is a timeline? The what is basically taken as the baselines. Then we need to know all the documents that we are creating throughout the project, and we need to be focusing in terms of some kind of, like, for example, we create our status reports, we create our change logs, our change requests, because we don't know how many change requests are going to come in. We don't know how many risk logs we are going to create, because for each and every stakeholder, the way how we report to them could be different. Meeting minutes, those are all going to be accumulated into one particular area, which is what we call it as the project documents. And we also need to have another set of documents, which is absolutely something as a project manager you have to follow, but you don't have authority to change it. For example, if I have to archive my project documents, what is the naming convention for the archival process? Where am I going to store it? How is this retrieval going to happen? All those information is defined at an organizational level, and as a project manager, I may not have authority to modify this, but I should only be following it strictly. Those are the ones we call it as the additional components. So these are basically the elements of your project management plan, which we will be creating. Now, when you talk about the focus, what is the main focus? We talk about the most important element, which is also called as the triple constraint, and at the stage where you will be creating your baseline, which is basically your scope, time, and the cost factor. But is that all that we are looking at? No, because there may be certain other areas which can have an impact on these scope, time, and cost factors, which is going to have an impact on the customer satisfaction, which is what we call it as the risk factors, quality factor, and the resource factor. This is what all of these put together will impact the customer satisfaction. So as a project manager, whatever we need to align with in order to get our project in a more comfortable manner is all going to be taken or planned or documented at this particular stage. Now, after the planning is done, or while the planning is happening, your team can start with the execution. So when the team is actually doing the execution work, as a project manager, we are only going to be focusing in terms of leading the team, because we are not going to be the execution team member, right? But we are there to lead the team. So how do you do that? That is where all soft skills are going to be considered. All your interpersonal skills are going to come, and it's going to play an important role. Like, First is I need to understand what is my leadership skill. Because if I'm a micromanager versus I'm a very servant leader kind of a personality, I need to first understand my own preference. Then I need to talk about what kind of a team member I have so that I can support the team member performance. End of the day, what I want is to create a collaborative team environment where my team feels empowered. Apart from that, when the team is doing the work, as a project manager, we have to constantly communicate and collaborate with the stakeholders to make sure that all their expectations are handled in a more conducive manner. Whenever there is a need as a project manager, you will take on the hat of a trainer, coach, or a mentor. And end of the day, any kind of conflict situations, you are going to iron it out. So those are the ones we are going to talk about as part of your lesson 4. Now, when you say you're working in this particular area, so what is the output we are expecting or the outcome we are expecting here? Those are the work results. So as long as you are motivating your team, you're guiding them appropriately, removing all their impediments, letting them stay focused, work results are not a problem. So all you have to do is focus on your soft skills so that your team can start focusing in terms of their work. While you're doing your planning and execution throughout, we will also be working in terms of the monitoring and controlling aspect. When you say monitoring and controlling, of course, we are expecting the overall health of the project. Whether our project progress is good, bad, ugly, those are the ones we are going to focus here. So which means we need to understand if your project is going as per the plan, well and good. If not, you need to focus in terms of how do we handle changes. We should also talk about continuous improvement in a more proactive manner. This is the place we will also be focusing in terms of your earned value management or your burn charts if you're using agile approaches. We should also be focusing in terms of because whenever you say you're working, you're evaluating your projects, how are issues and impediments handled? So these are our main focus, and end of the day, you want to support the performance. Team performance as well as the project performance is going to be our focus point. So these are the ones we are going to evaluate. I have to change this color to make it. And as part of this particular focus or our work itself, the next one we are going to talk about is in terms of closure. When we say we are working in terms of the closure, as you can see, there is one segment which is within the circle and the other one is outside the circle. This is what we call it as an administrative closure. This is what we call it as an admin closure, and this is your proper project closure itself. So, what is the work you will be doing as part of this? We are trying to focus extensively in terms of the closure aspects, all the documents and everything. We need to also evaluate whether the benefits realization has happened, and finally, any kind of knowledge transfer. So this is the place we will be focusing in terms of sign off, all the payments, all the claims administration, all the documents, documentation work or the artifacts that you need to create, all the lessons learned, etc., will all come under this particular area. So when you say you're going ahead with a closure, what is the expectation? What is the output that we are expecting? final product, service, or result transition. So this is how we need to evaluate whenever you talk about the different stages of the project. How everything comes into one unit is very important. You can also see monitoring and controlling cuts over every single other area like initiating, planning, executing, and closing. So which means while you have started with your project itself, you will also simultaneously start with the monitoring and controlling phase. So this is how our seventh edition of PMBOK has organized. The lessons have been organized. So have this overall bigger picture in mind so that it will be easier when we are moving on in a individual manner. When we are going through, it will be much easier. Hope you liked the full recap. Please feel free to give me your valuable feedback, which will help us in improving and at the same time motivate us in posting more such videos. As most of my participants are aware, I'm a pictorial person, so I need everything in pictures to remember the concept. However complicated concept, I try to come up with simplistic pictures to remember it. What are your other complicated topics? Feel free to share it in the chat so that we can see how else we can address those. I'll come back again with a similar concept very soon. Until then, bye-bye.